Matt's getting tea and he'll be here in a minute.
All right. Welcome to the Helm Developer Call, May 14th, 2020. A reminder that anything said here is put on the YouTube, and you might not want to say things you don't want on YouTube. So looks like there's no announcements for today. So we can move right into the discussion. So first we have Mark regarding a Circle CI failure.
Yeah, so there was a commit recently that broke make test style, but it didn't trigger a failure on the Circle CI. So I'm not sure, I'm not familiar with how that's set up, but I put a link to the build that should have failed, and it actually says test style warn cannot find something something, and then it continues as if it was successful. So I'm not sure who's the best person to look at that or to help me look at it. It's fixed on master for now.
Morning, Mark. I can go and help and take a look at that. I know that we had some issues in the past with varying versions of Go, like upgrading to a new version of Go would make the linter pass in certain scenarios where it would fail before, or it would introduce new things that it would fail. But it could be a couple of different issues. It could be related to the script and how it's being handled and how it's capturing the output. And it's just the warnings are not being properly done there or something like that. So yeah, I can help you, or I can help take a look at that and see what
should
might
we
be causing that.
Can we pair? Because I'd like to figure out when you say I've paired with, what that means.
Yeah.
So if we can pair, then I'll know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe after this call, I can ping you offline on Slack and
on Slack. Perfect. Thank you. Josh, I'll take the second issue since it's mine as well.
Sure.
I just so I posted a PR quite a while ago, and that's fine. Everybody's busy and all that stuff. But now there's a contribution that came in from a new contributor about some completion stuff. So I wanted to encourage that, but it's blocked by this PR that needs to go in. So I thought I'd put a little more pressure on if somebody has time to look at it. It's also blocking like 4 or 5 things I'd like to do for completion. That's it. So just in the forefront.
Does that new one replace what you're doing?
The contribution for the guy, or
The 8111?
no? He's just bringing in some Cobra stuff that is available with Cobra 1.0, but it's going to break plugin completion. And if plugin completion is technically a contract we have with the plugin developers, so I don't want to break it, right? Even temporarily. So I'd like to just fix the plugin completion to make sure that it keeps working once we start using Cobra 1.0. We are pointing to it, but I haven't put in the hooks to actually use what it brings in. I can pair with somebody to do that review as well if that helps. Once Fisher shows me what that means.
yeah, maybe at the same time we can go and take a look at that one too. Well, we're already at it, so
if you have time.
Yeah. Today's a free day for me. Clinic hours are open.
I'd love to check that out as well if I'm available when you two can meet. If there's a way to do this.
The completion stuff or the Circle CI stuff, or both?
I was mentioning the completion, but I'm also open if more help is needed.
Okay, great.
All right. Moving on. We have, Predrag, do you want to talk about the alternative to repositories YAML?
Yeah, thanks. So just the Red Hat, we started recently to think about about the possibility or an option to store a Helm chart repository and configuration inside of the cluster and actually read it from there instead of from the local file. So should I share the screen just, or somebody can click on the link there? Or
can I allow?
or you
I
can just
allow
click. You can
You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Okay, so see my screen, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here, just I just wanted to validate first idea with the group, and if this is kind of something we the upstream will be interested in, we will then open the issue at Helm and contribute some PRs later on. But the idea is that simply a similar way as we described repository configuration in JSON file, we could have like a custom CRD with necessary fields, and then once we have at least one instance or multiple instances, we can read them from Helm and use them for installing, updating charts and rendering templates. So just want to check up with you if this makes sense for the community upstream, or if this is something what you would not be willing to have in the upstream.
I guess the question is, what exactly is the use case for this here compared to putting it on the local file system? Because I mean, there are...
Well, the admin could, some cluster admin could already pre-configure a couple of repositories, and so that we don't need to, maintain those information locally. So the developers, getting the access to a given cluster could immediately get this kind of configuration streamed to their machines, and they can use that instead of manually adding Helm repo add and whatever. And also along with the previous week, so we are kind of interested in running Helm in read-only environments, and that would be additional piece of configuration that could be kept somewhere else and not on the file system locally.
Right.
So,
that you... Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Farina.
No, you go ahead. You're on a roll.
Oh. So the interesting thing that you're bringing up here is that you're interested in an administrator being able to manage it for other tenants. In the case of where other people can connect to the cluster and they have access to the repository list, and assuming that that's like a whitelisted list of repositories that they can install from.
Right.
One of the cases that's been really interesting in this has been there are other projects out there that are similar, like Helm, or that use Helm under the hood, like the Helm operator, like Flux CD, which is one project that kind of works as a operator that allows you to be able to install Helm charts on the cluster, but it's from an administrator's standpoint. Have you looked at those projects and seen if there's some similar things there? Because it's interesting that you're talking about an administrator managing configuration for the user as opposed to an alternative tool.
Well, it's kind of complementary. So administrator, so we are kind of looking that we can say pre-prepare for developers a couple of repositories. We are not forbidding, in this particular case, we are not forbidding that a developer can add locally also additional repositories. But we are here out to simply to have a list of like whitelisted set of repository that developer can start working immediately, and he can add additional things later on his local machine. It's like pre-populated configuration when you have access to a given cluster. So it's not really operator kind of approach. So we still want the developer can use CLI.
So I'm trying to understand the use case here, because I think I've heard two different distinct ones. One is going towards a read-only environment. And if I remember the previous context, it's CI systems and things like that that want a read-only environment. And then the second use case is to help a new developer, somebody coming to a project, to get up and running more quickly. Are those the two particular use cases?
Yes.
I think you also have a third use case too, though, which is when teams of developers are all using a single shared internal repository, this greatly eases the use of the sharing of repository information between teams of developers.
Yeah.
Sharing,
So
sharing conflicts as well, right? Yeah, okay, yeah.
So I was going to walk through each of these cases though. So in CI, Helm has a bunch of commands where you don't need to add a repository first. Helm fetch, Helm install, those can work with a URL out of the box. And so I can do something like Helm install and give it a URL, and it will install it without me needing to add the repository first. Right? And so there are certain use cases in CI which you don't have that issue of needing to load it into memory or needing to have the repository first. So I'm curious about the CI cases where you need to have the repositories.
No, it's not, we're not targeting here CI at all. It's targeting really like developer cycles. So developers having access to cluster, they want to develop, try this something out, deploy some charts. And as you mentioned, we want to share some predefined configuration with them without need to, instruct them to run Helm repo ads on their local machine.
So this is to get around the idea of going to some documentation. It says, okay, here's our shared repository. Do Helm repo add the repository link? Because I imagine they're already using Git, and so they have to do a Git clone on their stuff. And so they're used to doing a couple of these setup options to set up environments. And so this is to not have that manual step of doing Helm repo add for the common repository that you're using in your team?
Right.
So an interesting way of looking at this, Matt, would be imagine if Helm Hub could serve out this CRD. And so the installation process for adding new repositories from Helm Hub would be something like basically kubectl install this thing or Helm install this thing, and then you would have your entire repository set up in cluster. It's a very interesting idea. I'm fascinated by this.
Yeah. Yeah, that will be also additional use case. Yeah, you can simplify installation of different, repositories by just providing YAML files, right? Yeah.
I like. Go ahead.
No, go ahead first, Mark.
I just wanted to say that I like the innovation of centralizing in the cluster, which is shared by the whole team. We have multiple clusters, and what I think is going to happen is that when I point to one cluster, I might get some repos, and when I point to a different cluster, somebody hasn't set it up properly, then I'm going to do my Helm install, and it's going to say, oh, I can't find that same chart that I could find in the other cluster. And so there's some kind of synchronization thing that I'm not getting, but the idea seems interesting.
Okay, so it's worth exploring creating an issue.
Yeah. I would add on to what Mark said. Some of the tricky ones would be, how would Helm search work? Would it only search the ones, because in this case, it becomes sensitive to kubeconfigs cluster, right? So how would that work? How would things like Helm search work? And how would we locally keep the cache? Because even with anonymous repos, we currently keep a local cache of what's there. So those would be two interesting ones that we could mention on that issue.
And the other thing that catches me here is this is a CRD. And I'd be curious to know what others here think. In Helm 3, we use secrets instead of CRDs to store our stuff because we have end users who can't install CRDs in their cluster. They just don't have permission, right? And so I'm wondering if it would be better to use a typed secret for something like this, instead of an opaque secret, a typed secret, instead of a CRD, so it can hit a wider audience and all those people who just can't use them. Yeah, and Scott brings up a point here, and this was one of the things on my mind. Whether it's a CRD or a secret, how does this work with the namespace you're pointed at? And what namespace has what list, and how does that work? Because I might be at a cluster, and somebody else might be pointed at a cluster, and we might have access to different namespaces. Do we get different lists? Does this go across all the lists stored in all the namespaces? Well, what is the experience for this work?
Initially, the idea is simply to have cluster-wide like resources, but we could also start supporting also some namespace resources as well. I mean,
Yeah.
our like use cases was administrative configured cluster for developers to have access to particular repos. Therefore, like cluster scoped CR, but we could extend and think about all, you know, the use cases you mentioned, like what if this is in a namespace and we have different like you know, a list of resources visible to different people. Yeah. But originally our idea was like cluster scoped resources.
Hey, Predrag, can you maybe document this in the issue so we can carry it on?
Yeah. I mean, this was just like I would just want to have a quick check with you if this is a kind of sane proposal. If since I got like a kind of answer yes.
No, I think there's interest. I think it's just more like
Yeah.
documenting the opinions and stuff.
Sure. I'll create an issue with this content and extend a bit more, and then we can start conversation from there. And hopefully, then we're going to provide you some PRs about that in near time.
I just wanted to say that I took some notes in the doc for the meeting, so to help you start the issue, it has some of the issues that we talked about.
Thanks. Okay, that's it from me. If you don't have any further questions, thank you for the attention.
Awesome. All right. So Bridget, do you want to talk about or introduce the OCI topic?
Yeah, I know this is a rabbit hole that we could go down forever, and I know we have 11 minutes and other things people want to talk about, but I want to make sure that we don't just tell people, oh, go look at the notes it's not even notes. I think Josh was pointing us to a video of a different meeting, and I want to make sure that we have a plan here. Like, does the pull request that Josh links for the OCI dependency PR, does that solve everything, or is there something we need to do to make sure that anything that's currently, experimental could become, production ready? I don't even know if this is something that we're going to be able to do in Helm 3. I don't know. I just want to make sure.
So before Matt Farina goes on a rampage here,
I'm not. I was actually going to ask the status. That's it. I just questioned. Where do you think sitting?
I have the mute button. I have the power of the mute button. No. So your name was used in third person many times yesterday on this call, so you might want to listen to that. Nothing negative. Just it was a very big part of the call was some people asking what is he talking about, and a lot of people just trying to figure out really what needs to be done there. What they need from us is a concrete list of things that the Helm project needs from them in assurance to remove the experimental flag, because some people are of the opinion everyone's using Docker registries all over the place. And even though the spec hasn't hit 1.0, it's still a thing. And they're not really seeing a reason not to go experimental or turn off experimental. So it's really hard to determine the status here, but
it totally is. And in fact, I think Jimmy made a comment, and I wish I had it in front of me. Actually, I probably can pull it up. And it was one of the things that still, this is the thing about specs, right? Is this one of those specs where it waits for everybody to be using it before they give it the thumbs up? Or is it a spec that you can depend on, right? So like lots of the HTML specs, when they go do the HTML spec, it's being worked out by people at different companies, and they bake it in, they work together, and then the spec kind of says, hey, look, everybody, you can trust it, but it's already there. Or is it a spec where you actually get the spec and then people know and they can build to it? There's kind of wiggle room there. But when I asked on the distribution spec, which is about to go 1.0, it says, and in OCI, some of their specs have versions to them, and they're semantically versioned. It tells you so much. Like they're doing release candidates for the distribution spec. You kind of know where it's at. You don't expect it to change because it's implemented. But Jimmy said, in relation to the distribution spec and artifacts, it says this repository does not attempt to reference artifacts at all. It is only concerned with container images. And so the distribution spec is concerned with container images. Then there's another repository on artifacts, right? On things you can do to make artifacts work. And my question is that an experiment? Is it something that people can go to town on and trust is going to be there? Is it being baked into the decision making? Is it something we can stably rely upon? Right? Like they're not going to go change it. They're not going to say, well, artifacts was a passing fad. We're only going to do images. Where is it in the realm from experiment to stable? Like, where is it, and how can we know that you say that? And I can't get anybody to give me an opinion on it, which means I don't know. Like, is it an experiment? Is it not?
Does that mean
I don't actually know.
I think yes, and I think what Bridget just said, I think part of it is yes, we decide. And so Steve Lasker has his own opinions on what artifacts should be, but other people think it should be sort of the best practices guide. The spec is, the language is changing in the next few weeks to sort of be softer on the image. I think there's a lot of opinions. Jimmy wants it to be all image. But basically, like, a lot of opinion I'm hearing too is that it does come from Helm's decision that this is the way it will be done, and that will drive basically it doesn't. I view artifacts as a best practices guide versus a spec, and I think if we just put a paragraph in the distribution spec 1.0 that you might reference this as a best practices guide, but Helm still has its way of using the API. It's still valid ways of using the API. Even if that artifact's best practices change.
But the distribution spec says it's for images, not things that aren't images. And so we're talking about putting things that aren't images in there. But the spec doesn't say, hey, this is for things other than images, which means we're going off of the documented beaten path. They're not saying it's okay to stick other things that aren't images in there. So if we start doing it, it would be like, hey, maybe I'm going to go stick all this other random stuff inside of a chart that has nothing to do with it, and the Helm maintainers aren't behind it. Is it cool?
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The argument to be made there is that it would be completely okay for Docker distribution, the project itself, if they want to be 100% OCI compliant, they could pull out the artifacts capabilities that we're relying on necessarily in those things, and we just wouldn't be able to be supported on that, and that would be an okay stance for them because they have always touted about OCI compatibility. So
I mean, yeah. Think about it this way. One of the issues with the Docker Hub is people tried to upload full movies for other people to download them, not in container images. And so literally, this was one of the problems they had to deal with in Docker Hub. But quite frankly, it's a hack to make something work, right? How is Helm sticking charts in there when they don't even say that it's okay to stick other things in there, anything other than another hack like that? Even if it's got a best practices guides to using a hack. I can find a lot of best practices guides to using hacks. I want something to not be a hack.
Speaking as somebody who back in the day definitely uploaded a lot of, TV shows to Mega Upload or whatever. Yes, we have all done that. And just to be clear, I didn't put this on here because I'm advocating for us to do something that could be a bad idea. I'm generally pretty careful with these things. I would just hope we could either look at that dependency PR or if there's a better place. Anyway, I know we're taking up too much time on this, and we'll have to punt some stuff next time.
It's an ongoing thing, but I think I have enough information to go back to the other side, back to the dark side, and get some more information.
I would like to make one more point about the experimental flag, which to me, the main reason we don't want to move the experimental flag off of that feature, even though I want that feature to be not experimental, is that currently there's so much documentation we have to do for the user of saying you can't put charts here, you have to be sure you set up this stuff this way. and this is largely because not all the repositories out there are yet OCI compliant, or it's not even that, right? Docker Hub is OCI compliant, but you can't currently, if I recall, push charts there because they deny that particular type, right? And so with things like that, I feel like we shouldn't remove an experimental flag if that means we're exposing the average Helm user to a configuration / conceptual nightmare when it comes to actually using that feature. That would be my main argument against removing it.
I think the UX is the problem too. I don't. I think Matt Farina is worried about the API. I think that the UX needs a lot of work, but that's an onus on us that we don't need help from OCI to figure out. Like that's. I think that's
actually,
on
I
us.
think that's true. Yeah.
Okay, so what is our, sorry, go ahead, Butcher.
I was just going to say, except for the Docker Hub issue, when the #1 registry doesn't support the feature, it's going to be hard to message to people. You can use this everywhere except for the #1 registry.
Yeah.
Okay, so Josh, we will follow up and add more to this later.
Yes, I will take the action to try to explain this again more clearly. All right, we have 2 minutes, so I know some people have meetings after this. Can we do assignments and then try to carry on to Vibhav and Jeff's things?
Honestly, unless they're super urgent, I would really like to punt those to next week so we can
Okay.
give them an actual answer as opposed to like 30 seconds.
That sounds all right.
Okay, yeah, and also feel free to open issues to discuss too. So can we get a volunteer for moderator next week?
I'll do it.
Oh.
Jinx.
Race condition.
Wow.
How about
Farina-
this? I'll
Farina,
do
you-
notes if you want to do moderator.
Okay, sounds good. I will write that down. Thank you. And who's going to do
Super easy.
issue triage?
Okay, I can do issue triage. I just couldn't find my unmute button. Yeah, it's been a few weeks since I've done it.
All right, and as always, anyone who wants help with the triage, I'm sure is appreciated. All right, thank you for the great discussion. We will see you next week.
See ya.